Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and after years, and I mean literal years, of searching and struggling, I have finally procured an issue of a comic book that has been eluding me since this channel began. That comic book being Brigade number 3 from the original Brigade miniseries. So without further ado, let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get started today, I would like to recommend that if you have not watched my episodes on issues 1 and 2 of this miniseries, I suggest you do so before watching this episode. Otherwise, the story events that are taking place in this issue will not make any sense to you whatsoever. And more importantly, I want to give a big shout out to a very good friend of the channel by the name of Jeremy, who is the man who actually got this comic book into my hands so that I could make this video in the first place. Thank you so much, sir. Good looking out. You are a lifesaver. First published in February of 1993, we see here a cover featuring both Seahawk and Thermal. And honestly, I feel like this is so far the best looking cover of the 3 issues that we've seen in this series. Just in terms of the presentation and the layout, I really think this one just pops. And despite the fact that it only contains 2 of the team members, it really just is a great cover that's super eye-catching and makes you want to pick up this book. Now, it is a little bit weird that the 2 of them are seemingly in outer space for some reason, unless that's just a perspective of them diving in from the night sky, which it very well may be. But outside of that, everything on this one is just hitting on all notes. Creator, Rob Liefeld. Plot, pencils, Marat Michaels. Script, editor, Eric Stevenson. Inks, Paul Scott, Norm Rapmond. Color design, Brian Murray. Lettering, Kurt Hathaway. Technical assistant, Richard Ory. Color separations, Digital Chameleon. The story picks up exactly where we left off in the previous issue, where we saw the Brigade team desperately trying to fight off a mysterious and aggressive alien by the name of Genocide, who, for seemingly no reason, came to Earth and just attacked Brigade. However, at the end of that book, we saw both Genocide and the entire Brigade team suddenly teleported to an unknown alien world. This world is apparently ruled by this individual who calls himself Magistrate, and he has sentenced the Brigade team to death for the crime of attacking the crown prince of this world, Genocide. Interestingly enough, we see that Genocide's name is now suddenly spelled completely differently. It is now spelled J''NISSYDE. I don't know the reason for the spelling change. Perhaps there was a lot of blowback for using the word genocide, and maybe a lot of people complained, or perhaps Rob just thought people would complain and decided to walk it back a little. Either of these things is entirely possible. I'm not certain the exact reason for it, though I do find it a little bit interesting that less than 2 years after this comic book was published, Marvel Comics would then introduce us to a character by the name of Holocaust, who we now know today as Nemesis, because let's face it, there's no way in hell Disney's going to be fine with a character whose name is Holocaust. Finding themselves in a very hostile situation, the Brigade team bands together and tries to decide what their next move should be. Battlestone then makes an attempt to try and rebuttal against the accusations made against the team by Magistrate, stating that they were the ones who were in fact attacked by Genocide when he came to Earth and just started laying waste to Los Angeles for no reason. However, this falls on deaf ears, as Magistrate immediately tells Battlestone that he is only to speak when spoken to and in a civil tongue, and none of that really matters because his judgment is final and they are to face immediate execution. Battlestone then realizes that there's not going to be any reasoning his way out of this situation, so he turns to the team and decides to tell them that they need to make a hasty retreat. It's at this point that the team decides to make their move. However, they are cut off on all sides by the walls of the arena. Realizing this, Battlestone tells Thermal to use her powers to blast a hole through one of the arena walls. She happily obliges, and the team escapes through said hole. Unfortunately, they are being pursued by a giant contingency of soldiers, which makes Cold Snap very afraid as he realizes what odds they're up against. And as the team continues to try to escape, Magistrate orders that they be hunted down and killed immediately. Unfortunately, the team then finds themselves in a dead end, and Battlestone realizes that they're going to have to make a stand here and now as he tells the team to get ready. Now, I want to point out, I find it very interesting that Thermal's powers have the ability to destroy seemingly solid concrete walls. Prior to this, I always just kind of assumed that her powers were fire generation and heat based. However, they apparently also have some sort of concussive property, as this wall was destroyed instantaneously by her powers. And this is an interesting development, which means that Thermal is actually quite a bit more powerful than we may have originally thought. The team then begins to fight off their attackers, and while they do find themselves initially successful, it very quickly becomes apparent that while they are more than a match for any of these soldiers individually, they are going to be overwhelmed by the sheer numbers they're facing off against, as they are completely surrounded and cut off and are just facing off against wave after endless wave of attackers. At this point, Thermal decides that she needs to take a chance and use her powers to try and blast a hole through the floor in the hopes that perhaps there is a sublevel beneath them. She unleashes a powerful blast which does open up a hole into a sewer system. At this point, the team all jump through the hole, enter the sewers, and try their best to make a steady retreat deeper into the sewer system. We then see an advertisement for Wizard magazine, specifically issues 11, 12, and 15, which all just happen to feature image characters on the cover. And this leads me to a point that I want to make, where I believe that at this point in time, Image Comics was definitely in bed with Wizard magazine to some degree, given the disproportionate amount of press that Image was receiving from Wizard magazine. You can make the argument that Wizard was only trying to benefit themselves, given that Image Comics were red hot in late 92 and early 93, so it seems likely they would want to jump on this bandwagon and sell more of their own magazine. However, Marvel Comics and DC were also doing really well at this time, and those companies had been around for decades. Meanwhile, Image had existed for less than a calendar year at this point in time, and was struggling to even get their books out on a monthly basis, so it does seem quite odd that Wizard would be so head over heels for Image Comics, where there's not something else going on behind the scenes. Getting back to the story, one of Magistrate's officers tells him that the Brigade team has escaped into the sewers and asks if he wants them to pursue. Magistrate tells them not to, and that he wants Brigade to believe that they've reached some sort of salvation, only to have all of their hopes dashed to bits. He then states that if they somehow manage to survive the sewers, they will immediately be apprehended by the Factor. Meanwhile, in the sewers, Battlestone grabs KO and tells the team to stop, as he's certain they're no longer being pursued. Upon hearing this, Thermal says she's going to make a fire so that the team can rest and try and figure out what their next move should be. As the team huddles around the fire for warmth, they are kind of at a loss as to what their next move should be, as Battlestone tells them he's not certain exactly what they need to do, but he knows they need to get out of these sewers. KO agrees, telling the group that while he's not exactly certain how they got here, it would suggest that they are on a planet where the inhabitants have some sort of teleportation technology, and the only way that they're going to find said technology and use it to get back to Earth is if they get out of these sewers and track it down. Though there are some members of the team who begin to have doubts, as Stasis brings up the fact that even if they make it back to the surface, they have an entire army that they have to fight their way through, and the odds seem incredibly stacked against them. Battlestone tells her not to panic, but KO echoes some of her concerns, stating that the team was barely able to hold their own against genocide on Earth, so it seems unlikely that they'd be able to fight their way through an entire army on this alien world. However, Battlestone tells the team that their only chance for survival lies in them having steadfast resolve and sticking together, which, to his point, is correct. However, at this point, the conversation is interrupted by a loud roar. Not knowing exactly where it came from, Battlestone decides to investigate and tells the rest of the team that if he's not back in 20 minutes to move on without him. Seahawk tries to join him, but Battlestone orders him to stay put. We then see Battlestone finding his way to a seemingly connected cave system that is part of the sewers, perhaps, as he tries to find the source of the roar. He thinks to himself that maybe he should turn back, but decides to go around one more corner as he doesn't want to leave any stones unturned. Unfortunately, this leads him face to face with a large, disgusting-looking monster who bears a not insignificant resemblance to the liquefier from Shadowhawk. The creature immediately lunges forward and attacks Battlestone, gashing him across the chest and knocking him to the ground. Battlestone is stunned when he sees that the creature has actually drawn blood, as he believes such a thing should have been absolutely impossible given his nigh invulnerability. However, before he can think about it any deeper, the rest of the team suddenly shows up to his aid. Seahawk states that they got tired of waiting, so they decided to follow his orders and move on. Realizing that he's going to need the team at his side to disperse this monster, Battlestone immediately orders the rest of the team to form up and attack. As they get into position, Thermal tries to fly in and use her fire to attack the beast. However, it is able to extinguish her flames through some sort of cold or liquid-style breath attack. It's not exactly explained. At this point, Battlestone orders Stasis to use her powers to freeze the monster in place. However, Stasis exclaims that her powers are not working. Battlestone tells her to concentrate, however, he is then cut off when he and Cold Snap are both ensnared by tentacles that erupt out of the ground and grab them. Thankfully, Seahawk is able to quickly free himself and then maneuver through the entire team, freeing them as well. He and Battlestone then make a charge at the beast, however, Seahawk is slapped away like a gnat. Realizing that this creature is incredibly powerful, Battlestone decides to try a different approach. He orders Cold Snap to open up on the creature with everything he has and freeze it solid. Realizing that this is a tactic that they had practiced in training, Cold Snap immediately obliges and hits the beast with literally all of his power at once, freezing it from the waist down. This allows Battlestone to charge forward and punch the beast in the ice, shattering it like it's a T-1000. We then get an advertisement for Entertainment This Month, which was a service in which you could send money to get comic books mailed directly to your door through the U.S. Postal Service. Getting back to the story, we see that Magistrate is quite angry when he is told that the Brigade team has survived the sewers and is now back on the streets. He decides that it is now in fact time to deploy the Factor and have them apprehend Brigade. However, he has also changed his mind that he no longer wants Brigade to be executed, as he believes they may in fact be useful to him in some way in the future. We also get a look at some of the Brigade trading cards that have appeared in other issues, one of KO and one of the brothers Cold Snap and Seahawk. They provide a little bit of information that we didn't have about these characters before, namely that KO and Battlestone have had a relationship with each other for quite some time, and KO knows Battlestone better than anyone else in the group. Now, the card for the two brothers is actually even more informative, as we learn that the two of them managed to get their powers during an experiment that happened underwater when they were on a subnautical mission with their father. Something apparently went wrong and endowed the two with the powers that they currently have. However, it does seem a little bit odd that some experiment that had to go on underwater would then give the two brothers the power of cold manipulation and also super strength, nigh invulnerability, and flight, as neither of these power sets really seem to have anything to do with the ocean. We also learn that this is where the brothers' fabulous wealth comes from, as they inherited this all from their father, who was killed during this experiment. We then get an advertisement for Spawn number 9, which was written by Neil Gaiman. If you'd like to know more about Spawn number 9, or Spawn in general, you can check out my Spawn playlist. Getting back to the story, we see Battlestone and the rest of the team slowly creeping out of the sewer, making sure that the coast is clear. However, the respite that they think they have is short-lived when Cold Snap turns to realize that they've been discovered. Immediately, a powerful attack is unleashed upon the team, which sends them all flying through the air. We then finally come face to face with the Factor, a team consisting of 3 members, Rain, Trek, and Knockdown. Realizing that the team is out of options, Battlestone orders everyone to attack. We see Atlas immediately go giant-sized as he prepares himself to do battle with Rain. However, Rain easily takes Atlas out of the fight with a single punch, knocking him out cold. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Seahawk decides that he's going to try and take Rain out on his own as he sneaks up from behind and hits him with a right cross. Unfortunately, this attack has absolutely no effect as Rain simply casts Seahawk aside like a child. At this point, Cold Snap and Thermal focus their energies on Trek as they unleash their own attacks. Unfortunately for them, Trek is easily able to absorb both of their attacks and redirect them back at the 2 heroes, using the cold to take out Thermal and the heat to take out Cold Snap. We then see Knockdown take out KO with a single blow, which is understandable given that KO is just a normal human being with no superpowers. Stasis then tries to use her powers to stop Knockdown, however, she is shocked when she once again finds out that her powers have absolutely no effect. This would lead us to believe that Stasis's powers are completely ineffective against anyone who has passed a certain level of strength, as we've now seen them fail twice on very powerful enemies, which does not bode well for her, as her powers are kind of what makes her useful, because otherwise her combat abilities are basically non-existent, as we see Knockdown slowly approach her and knock her out cold with a single flick to the forehead. Standing alone with the rest of his team knocked out, Battlestone prepares to do battle and face off against the Factor by himself. Unfortunately, Battlestone is also no match for Knockdown, as Knockdown charges forward and easily gains the upper hand against Battlestone, knocking him around like a ragdoll, until he's finally commanded to stop by Rain, who tells him that they have to bring in this team alive. With the Brigade team seemingly defeated, Trek then asks why exactly they're supposed to be sparing these Terrans' lives, as she can't possibly fathom what use they would be to Magistrate. However, Rain tells her that Magistrate's orders are what they are and it is not their place to question them. Upon hearing this, Battlestone, remaining forever defiant, decides to taunt Rain, stating, "If you're going to kill us, then why don't you just do it and get it over with instead of flapping your jaws?" Rain is enraged by this as he decides that he's going to directly disobey Magistrate's orders and kill the Brigade team. However, before this can happen, there is a large boom which sends the 3 members of the Factor flying through the air. We then see that these 4 randos that we've never seen before have shown up seemingly out of nowhere to rescue the Brigade team for reasons that are not explained, and these characters are apparently very powerful, as they were in one fell swoop able to take out the entire Factor team, who had no trouble completely overpowering Brigade. What's going on? I have no idea, but it's going to be concluded in the next issue. Also, I love that the designs of these characters are just classic Rob Liefeld, where they either have no shoulder pads at all or the biggest shoulder pads ever. We then reach the newly named Battle Cries letter section, where readers could write in and potentially have their letters published and answered within the pages of Brigade. I'll be honest, none of these letters are really all that interesting, as almost every single letter printed is just ball-washing the Brigade team for how much they like the comic book, though there was one tidbit of information that was divulged in these letters that I found quite interesting. That being that all of the trading card inserts that exist within the pages of the original Brigade miniseries were inked by the different image founders, which was actually kind of cool to learn. We then see a full list of names of all of the people who submitted ideas for the naming of the letter section, the winner being Justin Roca, who came up with the Battle Cries idea, but it is kind of cool that they listed everyone else's name who submitted an idea as well. We then get a full-page splash pinup of the entire Brigade team. This is really cool. I'm glad that this was included. We then get an advertisement for Bloodstrike #1 and Brigade. Now, if you have not watched my episode on Bloodstrike #1, feel free to do so and stay tuned, because now that I'm finally able to finish up all of my series on the original Brigade miniseries, it will allow me to then get into the ongoing series that will allow me to do the leapfrogging for the first few issues that complete the story between both Bloodstrike and Brigade. So that's going to be coming in the near future. Please stay tuned. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait to get into this. And on the final page, as well as the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Youngblood Strike File. If you'd like to learn more about Youngblood Strike File, you can check out my Youngblood Strike File playlist. And that was finally, after a years-long wait, Brigade #3 from the original Brigade miniseries. And overall, I think it's a pretty good book. The artwork is kind of spotty in places, but the story seems really good up until the very end, where we just have these 4 mysterious people show up out of nowhere to one-shot a team that was seemingly almost undefeatable and save Brigade for seemingly no reason at all. That part of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but who knows, maybe in issue #4, that'll all be explained in a way that makes perfect sense. And, you know, while I like the book as a whole, I'm still of the opinion that the ending could have been handled a little bit better. But then again, those are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that there was nothing wrong with this book at all, and that even the ending, despite it being so random and weird, was perfectly sensical. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.